do my before I do my introduction, I'd like to invite our national president, Megan Shellman-McCart, to say a few words.
Good evening, and thank you so much for having me this evening and inviting me and dealing with my children in the background. I know that this is such an important topic, and I am so impressed with what you have brought together as an affiliate, and I made this a priority today, which is why you're hearing little voices in the background, because even with priorities, we all are juggling quite a bit with our jobs and our kids and our caretaking and everything else we're doing. So I'm so impressed with this affiliate. Thank you so much for bringing this forward. And I hope that we can find a way to collaborate and eradicate human trafficking. I know that this is just the start to a much larger conversation. So President Nermeen, thank you very much, and best of luck with this presentation today. I will be listening intently as I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Good evening and welcome to an informative yet sobering panel discussion on human trafficking. As president of the New York City chapter, I'm excited to see efforts across New York City to identify women who may be trafficked. It is, as we will learn, a very real and pressing subject, but then one that we know about without knowing enough. It is one of the areas of focus for our New York City chapter, and I am pleased to pick our efforts off with this event hosted by New York City's Vice President for Programs, Emily Van Vleck. Our aim is to learn about the issue and use the education to unite, to press for solutions, and advocate the best practices we identify. Emily, would you please begin the program?
Yes, thank you, Nermeen, and thank you, everyone who is joining us today. Thank you, Madam President Megan, for your remarks, and again, Madam President Ms. Ahmad, for your remarks as well. Thank you to our fantastic panelists for being here and sharing your knowledge and expertise of all the amazing work that you are doing. I will present the panelists before moving into some questions to start our conversation for this evening, and then we'll open it up to question and answer from the audience. So, pardon me, we'll present the panelists and then give them a chance to speak about all the fabulous work they're doing to prevent human trafficking and address it in their respective communities before opening it up to questions. So first, we have Ms. Kelly Tallon Franklin. She is the founder and chief executive director of Courage for Freedom, a Canadian leading organization who exists to educate, train, and certify frontline and community service providers on proven strategies and prevention tactics to serve vulnerable victims of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. Kelly is an international and national anti-human trafficking task force chairperson with Business and Professional Women, and has been acknowledged and awarded many accolades globally as a survivor, advocate, and activist champion of minor children and youth. Kelly, her teams, and their projects have created awareness movements and developed support for victim survivors of human trafficking and sexual exploitation that include equine therapy, trauma-informed, and person-centric care approaches that are revered and respected. Kelly is a survivor, best-selling author, award-winning speaker, respected advocate, and trainer on the issue of human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and equine. Thank you for being here, Kelly. We appreciate it. Next, we have Miss Lindsey Lane. Lindsey is Senior Legal Counsel for the Human Trafficking Institute, or HTI. At HTI, Lindsey serves as the lead architect and author of the annual Federal Human Trafficking Report, which was just released last week, was it, Lindsey? So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. So the Human Trafficking Report She manages the data collection and analysis of federal human trafficking cases filed in the United States each year. She briefs government leaders and other anti-human trafficking stakeholders on key findings and emerging trends to improve prosecution of traffickers. In addition, Lindsey stewards HTI's Thought Leadership Team, which oversees HTI's Frederick Douglass Fellowship Program, and Lindsey advocates for innovative and data-driven strategies for combating human trafficking based on victim-centered, trauma-informed enforcement models. Lindsey serves as HTI's country program attorney in Belize, where she assists in training stakeholders practices for investigating and prosecuting human trafficking cases. Lindsey is an experienced prosecutor and trial attorney at both the state and federal level, most recently serving as a designated state human trafficking prosecutor. Lindsey is a graduate of Salem Women's College and Liberty University School of Law. Thank you, Lindsey, and welcome. And last but certainly not least, we have Miss Estelle Davis. She is an experienced attorney in immigration and labor laws, currently serving as Assistant Director in the Bureau of Refugee Services and coordinating the New York State response to anti-human trafficking program. She previously worked providing culturally appropriate, trauma-informed anti-trafficking services at the New York State Department of Labor as counsel to the Division of Immigrant Policies and Affairs. Estelle has worked for over 15 years in government, legal services, and community-based organizations. She is fluent in Spanish, received her JD from the City University of New York School of Law, and is admitted to practice law in New York. So there you have it. Those are our fantastic panelists for this evening. So again, ladies, thank you so much for joining us. We have a wealth of knowledge here, and I look forward to hearing from each of you. So each of our panelists have prepared remarks to share the work that they are doing to eradicate human trafficking and their background and history. So I'm going to pass it over to them to let them speak more to you about the work that they are doing. First, I have Kelly Tallon Franklin. Kelly, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be here. I will say bonjour, miigwech, and hello from Canada to all my allies on Turtle Island and those from abroad that are joining us. One of the things that I think is very important to understand is that human trafficking is not a singular crime. It affects more people and more industries, finances, and communities than we can ever hope to understand. I'm very happy to see the colleagues from HTI on and looking forward to more information from their recent report. I am a human trafficking survivor from the 80s, and I can tell you that I still suffer PTSD, complex trauma, and all kinds of different actual health debilitating things in my life, and I will for the rest of my life. So first, I would like to thank anybody who is working and putting not only survivors in as consultants, but ensuring that their leadership is part of their guiding principles. I also want to thank New York and the work that's happening in New York from the colleagues that are representative here, that you are not suffering from a stateless response. And that is something to be celebrated. My special area of expertise in human trafficking work has to do with consultancy, being known as an expert survivor witness, both to our Senate, parliamentarians, and other organizations, including police and victim support services, our health care teams, our trauma units, and our public sector support services. Currently, I have supported over 475 minor age survivors, so 18 and under, since 2013, and the number is growing. I am currently working organizationally with 47 young women and young boys. And for the sake of time, I will be presenting the female pronoun, just because 98% of the work that I've been engaged in Canada is female. We have a problem that transcends borders. I myself had been a victim that was taken across the border into New York, where I experienced your hospital systems, your transportation systems, your waterway, and everything else that was not only New York City, but New York State. And I saw firsthand during the 80s what was happening. I had opportunity to attend the United Nations as a delegate member for Business and Professional Women Canada and Business and Professional Women International. And I can tell you that the very same concerns that I suffered in the 80s are still there. One of the things we have to understand when we talk about this is not just the action that can be taken once there is a crime, but how can we get in front of the inhumane presentation of this crime? How can we be at the front of the awareness movement and of the prevention movement in order to decrease and eradicate the propensity for those that do not want to being commodified for their sex, their labor, their organs, their hand in marriage as a young person, their screen images, and the list goes on and on. Understanding the vulnerabilities that puts persons at risk needs to be mirrored with our capacity to not victimize people for being in that demographic. It's really easy to talk about statistics and the law and prosecutions and forget the humanity that's behind it. And they are not stories, they are not cases, they are somebody's lived experience. So I am very grateful for those that understand vulnerabilities, can intersect with Maslow's hierarchy, understand ethnic, diverse, gender sensitivities, and to really have human and cultural congruence in all the work that we're doing together. Rescues, recovery, and raids are not always the rights of a victim, nor should they be. We have to have things like non-conditional identification and legal protections that can currently have social inclusion and standards for the work that needs to happen, even in our research. We need to harmonize justice to understand the roles of forensic, and as important, the therapeutic care that needs to be offered. We need to understand informed consent. It's not enough just to say we're going to put bad people away, although that's a good goal. But what happens? How do we reform? How do we allow restitution for victims and survivors that they are going to need investigators, legal teams, attorneys, state heads? We also need retrospective action for those victims that may have been wrongly convicted at the hands of somebody that was a human trafficker, that forced them to commit coerced crimes that wouldn't necessarily be on the radar of those that are responsible for the protection in our communities. We're seeing some great work happen in my home province of Ontario that butts right up to New York State. And what we're doing is working with those in corrections. We're working with those that are also in probation and parole to be able to identify those secondary, tertiary crimes and understand the bigger picture in what kind of criminal activity comes outside of just the human trafficking charges. Having survivors lead the efforts and energy and not just be consulted, but there are many that are capable of leading to be to bring solutions that assist police in investigations, to follow the money, follow the crime, and understand it's not just industries, and it's not just gangs like the Bloods or the Serenos or the MS-13s who would be presented in highly racialized publicity photos when there's an arrest. But we also have to ask ourselves who's buying, especially children, and who's coercing our children and youth, because those are the biggest statistics that we see, not only in America and Canada, but globally. It is a growing concern. It is a growing crime, but it is an assault against our humanity when we are not protecting the most vulnerable in our communities with our awareness. And instead of gasping at what you're going to hear from the rest of the presenters, like we've all seen some fireworks, we need to start taking some notes and ask ourselves, what are the 3 takeaways we can come away from this meeting that will allow each of us to take action in our own sectors, our own communities, for the benefit of somebody not being taken across the border as I was. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for sharing your experiences with us. I have had the pleasure of meeting Kelly several times and hearing her speak, and every time I'm just awestruck by her. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and the survivor experience. I love what you said about harmonizing justice, because I think that's exactly what we're all here for, right? To harmonize the justice and harmonize the movement to finally eradicate human trafficking. So thank you for that remark. Next, we will pass it to Ms. Lindsey Lane, who is going to share her work at the Human Trafficking Institute for us. Over to you, Lindsey.
Thank you, Emily. And thank you so much, Kelly. I think it's wonderful that you let us off tonight. So thank you so much for kind of setting the stage for some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. I love being survivor-led, not just survivor consulted. So that was perfect, intentional or not. I love that it worked out that way. But I'm Lindsey Lane. I'm senior legal counsel at HTI, and as Emily mentioned in my biography, I'm also a former prosecutor. I spent the last 5 years prosecuting specifically human trafficking cases along I-95. I had a lot of cases involving victims that were coming down from New York, including Flushing, New York. So New York is kind of near and dear to my heart for those of you who are practitioners in that space. But what I found as a prosecutor is there were so many gaps. I felt so powerless at times. I wanted to help so badly and just did not have the resources or the tools or the skill set that I needed. Fortunately, I was surrounded by fantastic mentors through our local service providers who gave me excellent training, through our federal government who gave me excellent training to really teach me how to be a pioneer in this movement of being prosecutor-led, victim-centered, survivor-forward in how we handle these cases, and we look for accountability in traffickers. We identify victims earlier, and then we also hold accountability to those traffickers who are exploiting some of, as Kelly mentioned, some of our world's most vulnerable populations. So having said all of that, about 1.5 years ago, I tried my last human trafficking case and came out of the courtroom to do exactly what I just described to you, to go empower those prosecutors who were just like I was, who desperately wanted to have meaningful impact in this space, but they just lacked the resources to do that. So now I get to focus all of my time and attention on really empowering those persons, much like many of you probably in this meeting tonight, to say, hey, how can I make a meaningful impact in this space? And one of the ways that we do that at HTI is through the use of data. So you're going to hear me talk exclusively, probably for the rest of the night, just specifically about data. And so I'm going to share my screen with everyone just quickly to give you a little more information about the Human Trafficking Institute, what we do and how we do it and why we do it. If you'll bear with me just a second, if I can get some thumbs up, if everyone can see that, okay. We good?
It's perfect.
Perfect, great.
You can see the whole screen with the slides on the side, but
you can?
Yes.
Thought we had that fixed. Guess not.
Zoom every time.
I know, every time, never trust technology. So in the United States, we provide the necessary tools to improve justice systems' response to human trafficking and train the next generation of anti-trafficking leaders. Our programs promulgate the value of comprehensive data collection and implement data-driven training and solutions. So how do we do this? We have very specialized teams, including prosecutors, law enforcement officers. We offer very targeted training, and we do that through the use of data. We have data that drives each of those trainings to really help develop those targeted solutions. And that's one of the reasons that we were so excited to join this conversation tonight, is we're not going to talk exclusively about problems. We're going to talk about solutions, which is so important. A lot of times we miss the mark on that one. And we do that not just in the United States. We also have embedded exports, not for tonight's conversation, but at a later point in time, I'd be happy to share with anyone some of the work that we're doing in our country programs in Uganda and Belize and South Africa. What we did was we took the very data-driven, enhanced collaborative model of combating trafficking that is utilized in the federal court systems and really across the board in the United States. And we said, what would happen if we implemented that model in other countries that really have this tremendous desire to combat trafficking and have a high impact in those mechanisms, but they need a little bit more skills and training and resources to do that. And so we do that abroad, but domestically, what we do is really focus around data. And so how do we do that? It's through the publication of the Federal Human Trafficking Report. So we have not, if you are looking online, we have not released the actual digital version of this year's report. We have preliminarily revealed some of that information in preliminary briefings, one of which was in New York City last week. So we briefed New York service providers, prosecutors on some of the data that came out of their federal response to trafficking this year. But the Federal Human Trafficking Report is an exhaustive review of every federal human trafficking case that is filed in the United States for the past 23 years. So currently we have 2,929 cases, and we collect 279 different data points about that. Each one of those cases. Oh, again, technology. There we go. So most importantly, and this is what I hope to contribute to tonight's conversation, is the importance of data in seeking solutions to trafficking. Why do we need data? Number one, it helps us diagnose and prescribe. If we were to go to a doctor's office today, what would be the first thing that a doctor would do? They would conduct an examination, right? They wouldn't just look at us and say, we think you need this prescription, or try to diagnose what is wrong with us without actually giving us a thorough exam. So the Federal Human Trafficking Report is not a prevalence study. We cannot tell you how much trafficking is taking place in the United States, sex trafficking or labor trafficking. No one really knows that exact number. But what we can tell you is the victims who are being trafficked, the real stories, the real prosecutions that are taking place in our country. We do an exhaustive review. We do a full examination of those cases. And then we start diagnosing what are certain vulnerabilities, trends, key findings that we're seeing across those cases. This helps us identify patterns and trends. We know how traffickers are operating. We know what platforms, what apps, and we'll talk about some of those in just a second, that traffickers are using to recruit and coerce victims. It also helps us direct resources. We know if we have very vulnerable populations that are continuing to be represented in the victims that are identified through prosecutions in the federal court system that involve, let's say, foster care, then we can take that information and we can turn to our legislatures. We can turn to our county, city, local, or federal governments and say, hey, this is an area of need that we're recognizing in the cases that are being filed, and we think that you should direct more resources towards that area. It helps us measure impact. We were having a short conversation before we started today about, are we having meaningful response to trafficking in the United States? How do we know? How do we know that we're doing good work? And so looking at the cases that are charged, looking at how many defendants are being held accountable, looking at how many victims are being identified helps us understand if we are taking enough of a response, or if we're making any response at all into certain areas of trafficking. For example, you'll hear that there are significantly more commercial sex trafficking cases filed and very few forced labor cases filed. Does that mean that forced labor is not taking place in the United States? Absolutely not. Just means we don't have quite as many cases being filed, and we need to diagnose and prescribe a solution to why that is. It empowers advocates. What we want is to put this data into the hands of persons just like each of you in your respective roles, to not just see a number on a page, but to make it a very resourceful tool for you to see how you can drive best practices in your space. And then finally, this is what I spend a lot of time doing, dispelling myths and misconceptions. There's so much bad information on human trafficking, what it is, how it happens, what it looks like. And guess what? Data tells a perfect story. It doesn't lie. It is an objective piece of information. And I like the picture in the background we used of zeros and ones. There's not a narrative to it until we contextualize it. But we can look and see this year in the federal human trafficking cases that were filed, not a single victim was kidnapped. All of them knew their trafficker. They were recruited by their trafficker, and then they were coerced into a trafficking scheme. So data is very important to help create truth in the circumstances.
Lindsey, I'm so sorry to cut you off, but we are still on your first slide. So I want to let you know you have beautiful, brilliant slides here. I guess we're just not advancing as you're advancing through your slides. So there we go.
We're here. Good.
So you have, yeah, we see your graphs now. Everyone sees the graphs, I hope.
No, I wish you had told me sooner.
I'm
still going to go back to this. Can you see this one?
We're the victims of human trafficking. That's where we're at now.
Yeah. We'll start with this one. So one of the data points we look at, which is super interesting, is who are the victims of human trafficking in the United States? And so this is just a short breakdown of some of the interesting data points. There are, again, 279 different points discussed throughout the report that will be coming out. But you can see that in the United States that 39% of the victims this year, we were able to identify as adult victims. 34% were minor victims. And we have a very large percentage that's still unknown. A lot of the cases are still under seal as they are filed. More information will become available as time passes. You can see that 100% of the buyer cases, so defendants who were charged for purchasing commercial sex, were for soliciting commercial sex with a minor. So that's a good statistic to know that buyers of commercial sex are looking for those minor victims in the United States, at least in the cases that we're investigating and prosecuting. We often get asked, are there male victims of human trafficking? We can say yes. We know that there are. Here are cases that are prosecuted in our federal court system to show you that there is a small percentage of male victims in the cases that were filed this year. The predominant majority, though, was, of course, female. And then we have a large category that is still yet unknown. They'll be known over time. First, let me ask, can you see the next slide? Are you still looking at victims?
We are still looking at victims.
Interesting. Let's just go.
There we go. We're good. Yeah,
we'll just go like this. You might have to look at yourselves in the corner, but bear with me. So this is a super interesting data point that I would love for any of you in this space to take and run with in your research. But one of the things we wanted to look at this year is, what is the length of exploitation that victims experience in their trafficking scheme? And how long are they exploited by their traffickers? So in the cases that we were able to identify, these are the days that we were able to see a trafficking victim spent in exploitation. The lowest number was 1 day. The highest number, as you can see in 2022, was 3,042 days. And so what a motivating factor, what a motivating statistic for us. If we can take 1 day away from that number, then I think we can consider that an increment of success in this space. So this is a metric that we want to continue to watch. We want to break down, we want to study and say, where do we see the shortest length of time in exploitations? One of the things Kelly mentioned is this need to be more proactive in our investigations. Guess what? Victims don't run to you and say, help, I'm a victim of human trafficking. It's on us to recognize those signs and know next steps, and to always help and never do harm. So this is a really exciting data point. If you're interested in this, there'll be more information on it in our full report that will come out in a few weeks. This is another really interesting new data point we started looking at this year. Guess what? Technology has changed everything. Cash is dead. Buyers and traffickers are no longer using cash. What we're seeing is in a lot of the prosecutions, they are using mobile apps to have just this mobile instant transfer of money. Some people may think, well, this is terrible. Technology is kind of furthering human trafficking. That might be true, but also it's wonderful for investigations. If you've ever tried to follow a paper dollar, it's nearly impossible. But through apps like Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, we have the ability to subpoena records to follow a digital footprint of both traffickers and buyers. And also it can lead to victim identification. So when we get a small amount of digital forensic evidence, it really can open up the avenues for investigations. So just really interesting concept to see what are traffickers using to profit and exploit, or to profit off the exploitation of their victims. And you can see Cash App led this year. There were 37 different identifications of that app being used. Some of these I did not recognize. They might be used in different countries, one of which I think is used specifically in the Philippines. So really interesting concept to help drive our investigative techniques. So again, very excited to be with you today. Very happy to answer any questions that you might have. I'll try my best to give you the most accurate number that I can. I don't have all 279 data points for all 183 cases filed this year in my head, but I'm happy to share what we can and also support you in your work and let you know the amount of data that we have is always available to you. If there's a certain area that you are interested in or you want to know more about, you can always reach out to us and we're happy to meet those data request needs for you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindsey. Really appreciate all of your data and information that you can provide on this. I'm not sure if anyone else is aware, but the Commission on the Status of Women this year held at the United Nations was all about tech, and kind of how it's exacerbating issues that women face. And so it's good to hear that it can be used. While yes, it is being used to further exploit women, it can also be used to track these people and to end that exploitation. So there is a silver lining there. As if you have to look hard, but you find the silver lining. So thank you. Very, very much looking forward to hearing more about all of your research and information. And next we will turn it over to our last panelist, Miss Estelle Davis, with New York State, and hear more about what New York State is doing in their efforts to combat human trafficking. So Estelle, I'll pass it over to you.
Well, first of all, I have to say I am just so grateful to be here. Kelly, it's wonderful to hear your comprehensive overview. And Lindsey, data points is a big issue for us, being able to give identifications of potential cases, breakdowns, demographics. We're very interested in that. So I'm going to give you, it's a little bit of a pivot, but I'm going to give you the sort of 5 main areas of service that New York State currently has. And then I think one of the questions we're going to tackle later is more about eradication, and I can go into more kind of prevention strategies. But for our services, the first thing I would say is we have a state confirmation program for individuals who have suffered trafficking, and it is set up so that any social or legal services provider or law enforcement can make a referral to the state, and we evaluate it for whether or not it meets the federal or the state trafficking statutes. And if that individual does, then they receive a letter that confirms them as a victim of trafficking, that entitles them to services with either our local district social services offices, the public benefits offices, or with 11 service providers statewide that get a grant from the state. And the service providers primarily serve undocumented populations that wouldn't get public benefits. So the system is set up. And that letter can be used in lieu of a law enforcement report. So if somebody needs services, if they need it from the Office of Victims of Crime, if they are doing a T or a U visa, which are visas for immigrant victims of crime who cooperate with law enforcement. So it can help when somebody's not ready to go through a criminal prosecution yet, which I think meets a lot of our people when they first are emerging. So that's our first program. The second one I would say is the Response to Human Trafficking program, which is the grants that go to our 11 service providers. And they are located throughout New York State. They commit to including a trauma-informed, culturally appropriate services. We also try to emphasize housing first policies for stability for clients. And something that we added just this last year to that grant cycle is funding a survivor advisory board. So the organizations can use that money to hire survivors as staff, and a number of them have. They also have hired survivors as peer counselors. We hear great stories of the peer counseling groups and how comfortable people feel sharing in that space and how supported they feel. And it just, I think it's a program that we're pretty proud of and, hope to continue to grow. The third area I would say is our interagency task force, which brings together the various state agencies that may work with people who are identified as trafficking or at risk. So it includes our Office of Mental Health. It includes our Department of Health. It includes our Office of People with Developmental Disabilities. This is the acronym I have a hard time with. Office of Alcohol and Substance Youth Services. They recently changed their name. And then the two other areas, and also our co-chair, so my agency.
035.
I'm sorry?
175.
Oh, sorry, I'm just gonna ask all the participants to please mute until question and answer. Sorry about that, Estelle. Please continue.
No worries. So our co-chair of the Interagency Task Force is the Division of Criminal Justice Services. And so they have put out some model guides for the state police. They also serve as a consultant for any of the local law enforcement agencies if they have questions about best practices. They also have been looking at the START Act, was passed last year and allowed individuals who have been trafficked to petition to have those charges that were related to their trafficking vacated. So originally it was, prostitution related charges, but it's now been expanded to be, if you were also forced into drug sales or if you were also forced into some other aspect that goes along with this. And things like tax fraud, how many individuals had credit cards taken out in their name and then they're still paying off those debts. There's a new federal law, but that also can be addressed on the state level. So the last two areas that the state has programming in, one is under our Office of Children and Family Services, and it's called the Safe Harbor Program. And that is each county has an individual who can serve as a referral source, do case management work with minors who are identified as trafficking victims or at risk for trafficking. And it's a pretty specialized program. It's been growing slowly as they were able to develop capacity. And right now it is all counties throughout New York State. And the last one I'm going to mention is the New York State Department of Labor. Now, this is also particularly close to me because I worked for the Department of Labor for 10 years doing trafficking cases. And we conduct, if we get a tip that there's labor trafficking in a situation, we would go out and do a field investigation. And as part of that investigation, we talk to all of the workers present. We have a Know Your Rights card that has some graphics and the all-important hotline number, because in my experience, I would go out and talk to workers and they would say, what number? You can give me whatever you want in writing, but I want the number that you call. And we also did, so if somebody was identified as trafficking, they would be referred to one of the service providers. That was the first step. And if they were interested in being referred to criminal law enforcement, that was something that we could coordinate with the warm handoff to our partners that we worked with that were involved in the regional anti-trafficking task forces, and would make sure that the interviews were trauma informed, forensic interviews for minors, various programming along those lines. And most recently, we founded a child labor task force. I don't know if you all saw this, but there was an article that came out in the New York Times in the last month that was talking about the incredible increase in child labor cases throughout the US, and New York has experienced the same thing. The article focuses particularly on migrant youth. They may have been unaccompanied, or they may have crossed the border and been placed with a relative. We saw a handful of those cases when I was at the Department of Labor as well. So the Child Labor Task Force, we're looking at, target populations, how to do outreach, how to do prevention, working with the schools, and some public outreach and identification as well. So I would say those are kind of the 5 areas. And just to give a little bit of a context for labor trafficking, because I think labor trafficking is always not always, but often kind of a side issue that doesn't get as much media attention, and corresponding with some of the, the attentions circle each other and compound to each other. So when I was at the DOL, over the course of about 6 years, we had about 500 cases that were flagged for potential trafficking, which would have been a worker who reported that their boss threatened them, usually on the basis of immigration status, or physical assault, or withholding pay, kind of that future promise of payment, stringing them along on that line. False promises. Some of those false promises were to assist people with getting green cards. Some of them were, I'm going to make you a partner in the business. Anything that was sort of used to manipulate this person into staying in the job when they very often they weren't being paid for all the hours they worked. They weren't being paid minimum wage. And out of those 500 cases, I would say about 250, we were able to talk to the individuals and confirm that it would meet the statutory definition for trafficking, or kind of a lesser included crime. And out of those, I would say 100 of them, we identified as trafficking cases and were able to assist with placement with a service provider, with a U or T visa certification, if that was what was needed. And I just wanted to be clear that the number going down from 250 to 100 was often client withdrawal. So it was being unable to maintain contact with individuals. We would have people who left for relatives in Texas, and maintaining contact. We had lots of different mechanisms. WhatsApp was great for us, being able to text somebody online instead of they would have to maintain a phone number. So, we tried to use different mechanisms that we could reach people. And I would also say, out of those clients, the Department of Labor doesn't ask about immigration status when somebody files a claim. And so I would say out of those clients, probably about 95% of them were undocumented and 50% of them were male. So I think that labor trafficking is taking place, but it doesn't often go to a criminal context. And I think those were the areas I really wanted to cover as far as current DOL areas of service. New York State areas of service for trafficking victims. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Estelle. I'm glad to hear that New York is so involved in anti-human trafficking. And when you were talking, Kelly mentioned something earlier that made me think, what are the forms of human trafficking that we don't think of, that we don't consider human trafficking? And I think that you did just a beautiful job there, kind of overviewing all of them. So thank you. And, reminding us the different victims who we don't see as, oh, that person's a victim of human trafficking. Well, if you're a minor child being forced into labor, which I think there was a state that just passed new child labor laws. It's like 15-year-olds can work up to 6 hours a day, something crazy, but we won't get into that right now. So thank you all so much for giving us an overview of the work that you're doing, the excellent work that you're doing to eradicate human trafficking. So we are going to move into the question and answer portion of this, with me doing the question asking as moderator. So again, this is meant to be kind of an interactive dialogue. We want to talk about, solutions and what we can do to eradicate human trafficking. And my partner just got home, so please bear with me for one moment. Okay, so in your opinion, thanks. So in your opinion, what is the biggest hurdle to eradicate human trafficking? And I welcome anyone to answer this. And then, as a follow-up, do you feel that there is a way that the work of one of your fellow panelists can help bridge that gap? And I will leave it to you guys.
I'm happy to take the first stab at it. So I know I talked a lot about what our existing services are, but I would say we need to do more on the prevention end. We need to really look at what makes somebody vulnerable in the first place. And I think some of the things that, discrimination, I saw this recently and I really loved it, is that it wasn't that somebody is LGBTQ that makes them vulnerable to trafficking. It's that they're discriminated against because they're LGBTQ. And so they have lesser access to jobs. If you have a business that doesn't want to hire a trans person, then you are sort of pushing them into an economy where they can find employment. Somebody who has intellectual and developmental disabilities, discrimination on the basis of race, gender. We all know gender bias still exists. Look at our pay rates, immigration status, marginalized populations, indigenous populations, and COVID really, the economic consequences for people from the pandemic were extreme. So if you look at all of those discriminations, they lead to lesser access to education, lesser access to jobs, and poverty. And so then you look at poverty as a root issue of eradicating trafficking. And I will say from a recent survey we did of our service providers, they talked about lack of housing as being the #1 issue that made somebody vulnerable to trafficking because they needed shelter. And so if somebody came along and offered them shelter, there's a unequal power dynamic to that relationship. So I think a lot of what we do now is we base services on somebody's status as being a victim. But if we look at what happened to get them there in that first place and try to address some of those issues. And the other one I will say that our service providers identified was mental health, being able to provide culturally appropriate mental health services, mental health providers that are trauma informed, to kind of help individuals. So thank you.
Thanks, Estelle. Kelly, can I call on you as a survivor? I'm interested to hear what you see as the main hurdles in eradicating human trafficking.
Our solutions are disruptive. We have to disrupt the systems and the ideas of what human trafficking have been to understand the trends and the activities that are happening today. And I commend those that are working in areas of data, but the fastest, quickest data that you're going to have to actualize disruptive solutions are survivors. So a case file from yesterday, a call from a 12-year-old 4 hours ago. When survivors are empowered, and we don't empower them. We're not the great and wonderful Oz behind the screen pulling the levers. But when we actually give them skills and tools and solutions, whether it's by way of the court and justice system, police, or it's just by acknowledging, listening to, and finding all the service supports that my colleague was speaking to. And I would add addiction to that, because it's one of the services that often prevents housing or self-direction and self-efficacy for survivors to be able to exit successfully. It also includes that mental health piece that was spoken about, but they have to be operating concurrently. Because if you put someone in a home that has suffered human trafficking, and you have not addressed trauma as the precursor to all the other services or offer them concurrently, that trauma will come back and claw them back. And it takes up to 18 times for somebody to successfully exit sex trafficking. It's even more difficult sometimes to exit labor trafficking because of the additional stresses with culture and understanding of laws and protective devices that are actually there for migrant, temporary workers, or refugees. Those are our areas in Canada. Those are our names in Canada for those coming to live here that come from another ethnicity, diversity, faith, or experience. They might not have the same understanding of law enforcement, of court. It might be a transnational understanding that we cannot predict. So just to say, if we could look at diagnostically what a survivor would tell us in real time, that you will hear the same things repeated, whether it's labor trafficking, whether it's forced marriage, whether it's forced labor. You know, while I was at the UN in New York, there was a huge piece that came out in the New York Times about those that were immigrants living in New York, whether they were established and legals, but the number of youth that are forced into labor situations without agency to speak for themselves because of fear. And I think if we start disrupting, and those that are trafficking are the ones in fear instead of our communities, because we are actually sharing facts instead of myths, and we're offering one thing to do. So I like to do this wherever I am. If you want to be a disruptive solution maker, take out your phone right now, find out what your state or your American hotline is to call in information securely, to not put yourself at risk and not put someone else at risk, but to address this and put some eyes on the issue in real time. So understand your role. So to eradicate this, you need to understand, how can you have a conversation about this at your job? How can you know if your job is a pipeline or money laundering, or there is a criminal organizational element that is under, it does not have enough attention on it. So understanding how you can have a conversation with your family. How can you have a conversation in your community? How can you say July 30th, UN Day, to end trafficking in persons is going to be the day that I stop everything that I'm doing and I use my social media, my conversations, to look at what solutions are happening. And I'd say for anybody locally, wherever you are, find out who's doing the work, not just with the prosecutions. They are very important and I am grateful for them. But also in the prevention areas, how can we get our awareness voice out with facts that makes it harder for those that are perpetrating this crime to operate in our communities, when we kind of say, hell no, not here, not our community, and not anyone's community, and to reestablish the human rights of those that need us to be the good humans in this. And the last thing is to understand that this is also a crime that uses incredible psychology that affects frontal lobe and cerebral cortex and neurotransmission, and fries those that are victim survivors in PTSD and complex other mental health and health areas. If we do not have the supports in place to prevent this at the front end, by mitigating vulnerabilities before they're vulnerable. And as my colleague said, we are not going to blame. In Canada, there's a huge disparage in the number of those that are murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls that have been victimized through human trafficking and sexual exploitation. But we cannot just go down the ticky box list every time we do an interview with somebody in the media or in our research to say, here are the 5 categories of those that are most likely to be trafficked, without addressing the systemic disparage that puts them at risk. And that includes identifying privilege. So there's a lot. I have lots more to unpack, but I know there is someone else waiting to speak.
Thank you, Kelly. You're a great disruptor. Lindsey, did you care to speak to that question? You know, what's the biggest hurdle, in your opinion, to eradicating human trafficking?
Yeah, just very quickly, I thought that might be a trick question because we run a marathon of hurdles in this space. And I would love to say that prosecutors are the one who are going to solve the problem, but I couldn't do it alone without having the support from the resources that empower the victim, that help the prevention, that help the awareness, to make victims healthy and whole. And so really, I think one of the hurdles is just trying to narrow down into one issue and say, this is the perfect solution, instead of saying, how do we work collaboratively together? How are we working with our survivors to say, let us talk about this in a way that's going to make a difference and have an impact in a meaningful way, instead of trying to figure out, as Kelly mentioned, how to check the boxes and say, we think we can follow just this matrix. And so that collaboration is just so important. I think there's so many hurdles we face, depending on what type of trafficking it is, what type of situation. But really, you have to rely on one another. There's no one of us in this room that can fix this problem, but together we all can. Much easier than trying to do it alone. So.
Thank you. And that is, again, a part of this panel is figuring out where are the gaps, where can we all work together to eradicate this problem. So I'm happy to have you all in the room and start this dialogue, which is, so important, so critical to ending this issue. So my next question, and I think Lindsey, you kind of helped us segue in there, is, how does the work that everyone on this panel focuses on, how does it take into account the survivor experience? So Lindsey, if you would like, you can kick us off there.
Yeah, I think we kind of hit that in the opening also about being survivor-led. That's something I learned in my career, and also educating ourselves in how to work with the survivors in a way that is respectful, that is meaningful, that is welcoming, but also productive and efficient and effective. And I lacked that skill when I first started the space. I remember the very first time I had a detective bring me a case file, I had probably a 50-page statement from a victim, and it was all over the place. Nothing was linear. And it wasn't until I had an actual psychiatrist who would work with victims of trafficking sit down and say, do you understand the damage that happens, like literally biologically, neurobiologically, what happens to survivors? And I had no clue. So really that education and understanding changed my career. It made me a better prosecutor. It made me a better advocate in this space. So I feel like that's so important, of just kind of understanding the trauma, taking trauma-informed training. If you really want to be in this space, make sure that you have that type of training and that understanding before you go into this area. I think there are a lot of people who have really good intentions, but sometimes what they do might cause a little more harm than help. I often tell people that in training, this is the one space where doing the wrong thing is worse than doing nothing at all. Sometimes you can endanger a victim's safety. You can have them, you can cause a bad interaction with whether it be a service provider or a law enforcement, especially for law enforcement. One bad interaction with a law enforcement reinforces everything their trafficker ever told them. So we really have to be survivor-led in knowing what it means to be victim-centered and survivor-focused.
Thank you so much. And I'm curious, aside from that question, just if any of you have any connections or know of where someone can go to get this, trauma-informed training, so that everyone can be better advocates, so that you don't go out there thinking that you're helping and end up inadvertently, re-traumatizing someone. So if any of you have a quick plug for somewhere that you could pop it into the chat or talk about it. I'm all ears. Yes, Kelly, does that mean you want to go next?
If I can, to put a quick plug in, we have worked tirelessly across the globe, but especially in North America. We've done a lot of work in the state of Michigan, in the state of Florida, and we do have training modules that are for industry sectors. So if somebody's looking for advanced trauma-informed modules that's in healthcare, And we do transcend the border. If anybody's looking for police information, we work with our local guns and gang service supports and also the sex crime units here to help them with their investigative strategies. I very often will get called in to help support a trial, even though they have lots of court support appointed support workers. But sometimes having somebody trained in some tactical real-time things that can help, and my colleague would speak to this as well, how to go the distance, how to take that sloppy, messy, incoherent witness statement and make it make sense to a judge or a jury or a room of the peers, and to help preserve the witness's capacity to be believable and to be available without re-victimizing. We train in this. We also train those that would like to start a coalition in their community and give them a template about how to invite people to the party and how to set, a small mapping, and within a year have a coalition. So whatever training you're looking for, visit our webpage. And if we don't have it, we know people that are training. And yes, there is training available for military. I know there is in Canada. I would refer to my colleagues for the USA. There was a question in the chat, sorry. And we also, we work concurrently to also move the policies to mirror what the training is going forward. So those that are doing the training can also go back and ask for policy engagement. We've changed criminal codes, amended child and youth acts. We've executed educational, cross-state educational expectations through boards of education. And it all comes when we train people and give them their voice and the information. And the number one thing is to help them to stay safe in whatever sector they're working in first. We try in our training not to give them more work, but help them to work better.
Thank you, Kelly. And I will open it up to Estelle if you care to respond to that question. If not, we can move to the next one.
Yeah, I would say, I actually just came back yesterday from the Freedom Network conference in Washington, D.C., which was all about survivor-led and BIPOC impacted communities. And I would guess that about 90% of the speakers were survivors. And it was an amazing space to be in. It was intense. There were some, my colleague said there's a lot of spicy critiques of service providers and not being survivor-led, and the ways in which harm can be perpetuated in coercive environments. And I think that the movement has a lot of growth in the last 10 years in this area, and I'm happy for that and continue to see it. As far as the trafficking, the Federal Office of Victims of Crime has a TTAC Institute that puts together some great trainings on specific modules, minors. I'm not sure about specific training for the military, but that is something that I can look into. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but our interstate task force of New York State agencies, we have started the process of having a, I think one of the things I'm putting together from this conference is that we will first pull together a group of survivors to decide what the purpose of the advisory board will be and what it will be called. So we want to call it expert advice, lived experience, and consult with survivors. And it would be to look at all of the areas that the New York State agencies work in. So alcohol and substance abuse services, public benefits, mental health services, and have survivors tell us what policies and protocols, what was helpful, what was not helpful, make recommendations. So I'm very excited for that. brand new project going forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thanks for the recommendations. So I have two more questions, but I do want to leave time for the audience Q&A. So if we could maybe quickly talk about, you know, what are some examples of cross-border, cross-sectoral, cross-sector cooperation that you've seen that you find effective in eradicating human trafficking or combating human trafficking? What tends to work, and how do we encourage that cooperation?
Would you like me to share a case study?
Please, yes.
I had a young woman I worked with for quite a while that was being cross-border trafficked through areas in Vermont and Massachusetts and New York, brought back up into the province of Ontario. And during that time, she was being trafficked by a group that's longstanding in Canada, known as North Preston's Finest. They're East Coast folks that traffic women and girls, especially across all provinces, east to west, north to south in Canada. They were actually my traffickers in the 80s, so they're still at it. And what had ended up happening is during discovery, we had helped her and assisted her to exit and actually put 3 persons away. There was a lot of pressure on her to provide cross-border information. And at the time, she didn't have the mental capacity or the wherewithal to deal with her entrenchment. And through the pressure, re-entered. She became drug addicted, and so she was moved across all the way to the west coast of Canada. And she was cross-border sold to other pimps and perpetrators in the Washington community down through those lines, and toggled around. She figured out how to get herself out was by making a connection and buying herself, because she owed a trafficker debt. And so she allowed herself to be sold to Costa Rica for 30 days with the provision that she'd be dumped back into New York in order to try to make her way back to Ontario. The cross-border participation of allowing her the latitude to piece that together without just going after a prosecution for what either happened in Canada or the United States was victim forward. It put the needs of that person as a victim in front of the need to find her as a witness. And as a result, she safely crossed the border back over with multiple jurisdictional cooperation, both legally, federally, and especially at the border. Having informed border agents is a real key to this, no matter where in the United States or Canada this is. Right now, we are seeing a lot of cross-sectional border difficulty in Quebec because of migrant issues and forced labor trafficking coming into Canada. And so we're dealing with that as well. But having really well-trained border personnel that, you know, I knew which border to cross into and who was on shift. And when you can do that for a victim, you end up with somebody that's willing to become a witness and go the distance to help get those prosecutions that help bad people go away to jail for a while. So kudos to my colleagues, both in Michigan. I work a lot. I'm close to the Detroit border. And Windsor is a city that is the bookend city to Detroit. And so we have to work together, especially we have a safe house very close to that location. And it doesn't matter what side of the border, the ownership is on us all to make sure we're doing the right thing. So that cooperation is vital. And we also see it in the waterways because we share a lot of waterways through the Great Lakes. So it's not only there, and also in your transportation. When you see it in training your transportation experts to be the allies in case you have to transport a victim survivor to another country or another location, to know that you have trusted allies in transportation is just an additional Yahoo.
Thank you, Kelly. I, again, want to leave time for the Q&A from the audience. But if Estelle, Lindsey, if you have something you want to add really quickly to that question. Okay. All right. Thank you. So we are going to open up to audience Q&A. Thank you all so much for your time. It's just been tremendous information, and I love seeing all of, you know, the nuances and all the work that you do and all the areas that, you know, you're speaking about the same thing, or you know, the work that needs to be done and how you can work together. So thank you so much for all of your time here and all of your expertise. It looks like, Lindsey, there was a question in the chat for you from Sharon Simmons. She asked, is HTI all over the US? So Washington and Colorado could look at where we are.
Yeah, so we are located in Washington, D.C. That's our home base, but we are actually spread out across the country and in spread out across the United States and in 3 different countries. So our data collection, though, and our work is comprehensive for all 94 federal districts, which includes all 50 U.S. states, and there are 5 U.S. territories. And then our country programs would be Belize, Uganda, and South Africa. So we have physical offices in those countries. I'm actually outside Atlanta, Georgia, but our staff members that are stateside, there's 28 of us, so we are displaced throughout the entire country. So.
Coming to us live from Atlanta. Thank you. The next question, again, if anyone, feel free to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand and I will call in you. The next question was from Anne Sebastian. Sorry, Anne, if I mispronounced your last name, but Anne asks, how do the victims of trafficking know how and or where to get help? And I will open that up to anyone. Kelly, if you want to take a stab at that.
Well, out of the over 475 girls that I've personally had the privilege to support, not one of them knew they were being trafficked in the time. So wow. Chances are they are not going to reach out to you. And even after a lot of trauma care, a lot of them still are not able to identify that it wasn't a boyfriend or their family, especially with labor trafficking, that it was somebody they knew that involved them. It's really that psychological conundrum that needs psychiatric care and ongoing care. If you see some of the brain studies that have been done on me, I shouldn't be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. But we have neuroplasticity and we have hope. And so the hope is that those around us would be able to make those peer decisions. So in Canada, we have a national hotline that is available for law enforcement, but families and friends and concerned community persons to call in anonymously. And they will be guided through, you know, some very important questions and be given access to resources. We hotspot it and push it back to them and say, this is what's available in the community. Do you need us to make a call to your local police? Do you need some more information on this? One of the things that I would challenge everybody on, especially the underreporting in the numbers of youth, and my colleague from HTI spoke to this, that we're seeing the trends that they want to buy folks younger and younger for sex, and yet the reporting and the prosecution of those cases around minors doesn't match the information that we know, and even the street information that we know. And so I would say one of the biggest things that we can do is to educate young people how to stand up for peers. And so if you want, you know, some short PDFs on this stuff, it transcends states and communities. It's not just knowing the signs of human trafficking, but if you know the behavior, it's the behavior that tells you it's a sign. And we can shortlist it and give you some information. And then it's your responsibility to look up the hotline in your community to know how to make those calls, because there's not one survivor or any of the 47 that are on this whiteboard I'm staring at right now that knew in the moment that they were being trafficked and they needed help. The level of shame and coercion on a trafficked person says, it's your fault you're here. You decided to do this to yourself and nobody's going to listen to you. That is the purveyance of that is drilled into them day and night as the psychological warfare to control them.
Thank you, Kelly. It sounds like, I mean, and Ella saying be most grateful for the that list. It sounds like we need a whole lesson. That'll be the next next part in this series, right? Is that lesson on how to look for these behaviors, learn the behaviors, and educate people. And Estelle, I see you. Did you unmute to?
Yeah, I would absolutely. I agree. I think this sort of self-blame for being in a bad labor situation, and that somehow, you know, it's feeling like it's our fault, and then that leads to this shame cycle, and then not coming forward. And you know, I think with sex trafficking, you end up with all of the issues surrounding sex and morals and gender. And I think with labor trafficking and men, I had a lot of male clients who it was incredibly hard for them to see, to express what had happened to them. Even, you know, I had one client who had been in a horrible labor situation for an extended period of time and had never told his wife what was going on. And, you know, it was when the employer terminated his employment very abruptly and then threatened him in another manner, and he finally started disclosing it. And it was just so much pent up. And I think Kelly has talked a lot about the physical repercussions, the you know, mental impact that this has, but then that impact of the trauma on your body and how holding that in. And I think those, you know, these are major considerations. I will also say I never had somebody come forward and say I was trafficked that hadn't already spoken to a service provider or somebody else who had given them the terminology. That was not, although I will say now with some of the minor clients with foster care, there's more awareness. I mean, I'm always so impressed with the younger generation, and I think they know so much more than I did at their age. So I think that that's hope as well. So I think the other one I would add to that is that I think labor rights, like having a standard know your rights training that's labor, that's incorporated, that's sort of your boss, you know, you have the right to minimum wage, overtime, you have the right not to be threatened in the workplace, you have the right to leave a job, you know, any of these sorts of things that are the opposite of what the employer, who is often, you know, particularly with new immigrants, new arrivals, the person that's telling them a lot of other things that are going on in the country. So having differing information on that. I did put into the chat one, the New York State service providers that we work with. There are other wonderful service providers throughout New York State. I also put in the U.S. National Hotline, which is sometimes called the Polaris Hotline. They have a directory of service providers that's quite extensive throughout the country. And so if you do identify somebody and you are able to, you know, connect them with a service provider who can provide the more comprehensive support that they need.
Thank you, Estelle. So what I'm hearing is it really sounds like we need a lot of education, education for victims of, you know, what it means to be trafficked, and, you know, that it's okay, that it's not your fault. You know, education for everyday people who may come across somebody who is currently the victim of human trafficking, education for people in their work rights. Sounds like a lot of education is what I'm hearing. And I think that's somewhere Lindsey and HTI can come in with, all the data. So I'm very glad that, we have such a powerhouse in here. All these great answers. So I'm not seeing any other questions. If there's any last questions from the audience. Okay, then I'm going to take the liberty as the moderator to ask the final question then, which is, and I think a lot of us are here wondering the same thing. What can everyday people do to help eradicate human trafficking? I think we've kind of touched on it here and there, being, a peer, being a friend, knowing the signs, but, what can everyday people really do to help push the needle and eradicate human trafficking?
I don't mind to start that off, and it'll segue from what we just talked about in awareness. So a data point that we look at and we will discuss extensively in the report is how do we identify victims of trafficking? It's very important. And what we're seeing is this expansion of multi-sector awareness. And so that's the biggest thing you can do is educate yourself. I always say this too. Don't just click reshare or like on an article about human trafficking until you have read it. Make sure that it's vetted, make sure that it's truthful, that it's data driven, that it's correct, and you're not sharing bad information. A lot of times we frustrate the efforts by sharing bad information. So only share stuff that is correct and it's backed up by statistics. So I did pull up while we were talking though, victims don't identify as trafficking. And the same as Kelly, I've worked with, I wouldn't count how many victims now, but I got a phone call even last week from a victim I worked with 3 years ago. And she said, Lindsey, I still have a hard time saying that word. I will never say I'm a victim. I just can't do it. I can just say that I was in a really bad situation. I didn't know how to get out. And that's okay. And so I did pull up some of the number one ways that the top ways that victims were identified just this past year in 2022. Number one was through family members, task forces, which is an interesting concept, social workers, the NCMEC, which is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, medical personnel, that's so important for our frontline workers, hotlines, neighbors, just Facebook making a referral. So again, technology can be used for good. Traffic stops, hotel staff, which is wonderful to see some of these large hotel chains doing some awareness training, and then foster parents. That is one of the number one vulnerabilities that we see among children that are victims of trafficking. I can't tell you what comes first, the chicken or the egg, but a lot of children within our foster care system and our juvenile justice system end up being victims of trafficking. It can be reversed also. So just education, awareness, and again, make sure that and that you're comfortable talking in a space so that you're not frustrating the efforts of many of the people that are joining us tonight. They're really trying to push good best practices.
Thank you, Lindsey. Kelly, Estelle, do you care to take a stab at that question or have any last words?
I'm not sure how much I can really add to that. I would say, there was and I'm going to give this as a personal example. There was a number of years ago where the New York Times did an article about nail salons, and it talked about, labor conditions, how much people were being paid, how much they were being exploited. They were being told, they had to work for free the first week as training. They were also working without proper ventilation, breathing in toxic fumes. There was statistics about increased miscarriages among this population. And I know that a lot of people had this experience, and I also had it where I was like, oh my God, that's why my pedicures are so cheap. So think about that. If you're in a situation where I also want to tell that as a personal story because we all grow, we learn, we grow. It's important that we keep doing so. And that, I think, what are the labor conditions? I also think with this article that came out about child labor, if somebody looks quite young, perhaps, you can contact your State Department of Labor. I'm not sure what the equivalent is in Canada, but I'm sure it's there, and kind of have have somebody go out and investigate and ask for their, minor permit that says what hours they're allowed to work, and kind of do a little check on those issues. So I would say, think about the labor conditions of what's happening, and that's on the labor side. And I would say also, we often, I think in the past, we seem to be getting away from the sum, but look at an individual as being responsible for the situation they're in, instead of the systemic factors that created them ending up in this situation in the first place. And so this aspect of respect, when we're talking about survivor-led, we're talking about respect for a population that has lived experience, that is telling you something that maybe goes against what you've culturally been taught, or who an expert is based on their education, or, you know, their use of language. And so I think really questioning that is how you get to better survivor-led programming.
Thank you, Estelle.
Of course, I have a comment if you have time.
Oh, for you and always. I know we're a bit over time, but yes, Kelly, if you want to wrap this up for us, and then we'll say goodbye to everyone. Thank you.
So I want to say thank you to my colleagues and to everybody on this virtual, first for the respect and dignity and holding space for me as a survivor, as I hold space for survivors. I want to say the easiest way to do this is to invite somebody that's a survivor who has experience. I mean, you don't just, some survivors are very excited to speak, but haven't built in their healing and wellness to be able to speak with a voice that's not re-victimizing themselves. I'm going to do some self-care when I come off tonight, and I have that built in with horses. But if you invite into your circles, into your industry, into your job, into your groups or associations or clubs, someone to come in that's a survivor with the capacity to speak to this. I know for us, you can tell us what you want us to focus on, and we can get you the data that you're looking for. And as you're listening, you're training yourself to be able to go back and amplify the voice of a survivor, because you've had them share a lived experience in real time, whether it's about court or housing, or whether it's about immigration or labor, or any check any of the boxes. And I just want to say that, you know, if you hear, you know, you've now heard about nail salons, and so you've heard about domestic servitude in these areas. It is not your job to go there and start questioning the person doing your nails, because you could actually put them at risk and they could go missing forever. So having someone come speak to you about what you're thinking about with your people is responsible, respectful, and offers dignity going forwards. Human trafficking survivors seeing people post out that they want to amplify our voices, and that they are sorry for the shame and the things that we've had to endure, and for the system fails. You know, having an apology from somebody in a community that the system did not protect us is one of the most powerful things that we can hear to align together. And I will say, people need to be very cognizant that this is gender-based violence in the extreme, but it is not the same. And although it does intersect with violence against women and girls, and gender-based and partner violence, and even femicide, there are succinct trauma indicators that are recorded in our DSMs, our diagnostic modules. It needs unilateral attention. It can't just be lumped together with everything else, and it needs your special attention. So I'd ask everybody to pull out their calendar and see when you want to book one of the three of us to come speak to your group, and how we can cross-populate conversations with goodness that you can use. You can amplify the voices. You can share the data, and you can talk about the solutions. That's who the three of us have been. And we need your help. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Lindsey and Estelle, for being here. This has been such a fruitful conversation, and I think it really, is going to help to kick us off for these solutions, So I'm going to pass it back to Nermeen Ahmad if she has any final comments as we wrap up tonight.
Thank you very much. It's been, I always think that I know how to control my emotions, but this evening has been a time where I have seen my emotions become naked. I've looked very hard at them, have realized how much there is for each one of us to do, if only in being kind and paying attention, so that we don't make mistakes, so that we don't harm other people, but build a fellowship of trust where people feel that they can come up to us and talk to us and say to us, oh my God, I feel like I can ask you for help. We don't do that enough. We don't pay attention to one another. We don't talk to one another, listen to one another, smile at each other. And that's my takeaway from this evening, that is absolutely critical. And it may seem very little, it may seem almost silly, but it's such an overwhelming subject that I don't even know where else I would be able to start. And I would love to say, I really thank you for sharing this with us. We will have the recording up. We'll hope to share it with as many people as we can. And thank you.
With that, it concludes our program this evening. Thank you to all of our fabulous panelists and all of the guests here this evening. As Nermeen said, we will have the recording available and posted up on our website. So again, thank you all so much. And I think we can end the recording now. Yeah, so thank you, ladies. I hope everyone has a lovely night, and I look forward to working with all of you to end human trafficking.